Hello, my name is Chris McGahee, and I am the Economic Development Director for the City of Duluth. And today I'm going to talk to you about the Downtown Development Authority as a tool for redeveloping your downtown and the economic ways that you can do that. Every city has a downtown master plan. It's either formalized or it's not. We follow this one. It's a loose plan about residential, retail, office. And this photograph shows that plan being implemented in real time. We have different areas of the city that we are creating residential, different areas that we are creating retail businesses, all designed to create a walkable downtown community. Our goal is to have basically 2,500 units of housing within a 5 or 10 minute walk of downtown. That is sort of the magic number that creates a sustainable core. And we use the Downtown Development Authority as a tool to be the interface between the private sector and the public sector. Cities can do certain things. Downtown Development Authorities can do things that cities can't do, especially when it relates to the private sector. We do have sort of a vision for our downtown. It's called the 10-10-10 rule. It was created by Roger Brooks. He studied 400 cities across America and Canada, and he found that there were 10, 20, or 30 things that all cities, great cities, had in common. And so we look at developing 10 places within a 3 linear block that have food service, 10 retail shops, and 10 places that stay open after 6, the nighttime economy. And so that's sort of a loose rule that we follow. And we thank Mr. Brooks for giving us that idea. Back in the year 2000, the town came together and we built Town Green. It was the 4-acre park. And we were creating a place where people could gather, a place of memory. If you're in an area that was growing as fast as Duluth was, Gwinnett County, we were growing 20,000 people a year in the county. So from 1973 to 2008, there were 28,000 people. Prior to that time, Duluth had a population of near 600 folks, and that was for 100 years. So if you can imagine the scale of change, if you're going to school, everything that you know and remember when you graduate and come back and visit is gone. It's a new subdivision, it's a shopping center, it's a school, but one thing for sure, it's not what you remember. So for the core downtown, we were trying to create something that would not change in its core values, a city hall, a town green, public buildings that were significant, architecturally significant. So we built Festival Center. Every town has a group of folks that get together to try to do something to better the community. In our case, it's the Fall Festival. They built this structure, the Festival Center. They have a 2-day festival once a year, and we built off what they do in our downtown. And of course, we built City Hall. City Hall is a Georgian-style structure. It's 43,000 square feet, but the significant thing about City Hall is that it anchors the downtown. It creates a sense of belonging. It looks like it's always been there 100 years, but you do whatever you have. Your City Hall is what you make it. Your city is somewhere, and that's kind of important about what you determine how you're going to develop your community. For us, we're a suburb in this ring of suburbs just outside of the perimeter, about 37 miles from the Atlanta-Hartsville Airport, Jackson-Hartsville Airport. And so that kind of dictates who we are. But Gwinnett County is one of the fastest growing counties in the nation, and it will have 1 million people in about the next 5 years. So we know that we're a suburb, we're proud of that, but we're trying to create urban amenities in the suburb, trying to capture some of the people that are educated in our school system and then go out and get a degree and come back. We'd like to bring those people back to downtown so they can make a living here. Every city has a history, and that's really important when you're thinking about your community and what scale you're trying to achieve. You have to look back at what you were, where you've been, and where you want to go. So this was Duluth in the 1930s. It was an agricultural community. The train was very much part of the daily economic life. Goods and services from the agricultural community flowed into downtown. These structures were merchant structures that were developed to service that agricultural community. In this photo, the structure that says bank, that is the only thing that remains, and we'll talk about that in just a little while. You have places. This is Parsons Alley, and this is the subject of this webinar. Parsons Alley. In this photograph, the bank still exists. House to the left, the top right corner, and then some of the retail buildings to the left. That is all that remain in this shot. We discovered that if you look back at the archival records, every 50 years, it seems that the community scrapes this site clean and puts something else. So on this site, we now have a 1904 building, a 1947, two buildings in 1947, and what we're building today. We tried to go back and examine why is it that the community takes these structures down every 50 years and see if we can figure out how to have them survive longer. The economy of your area will change. We've had many changes throughout Duluth's history. This was the agricultural community, so the rail was a vital part. There were docking systems set up to take the agricultural goods and services. And in this photograph, only the church up at the top of the corner remains. So all of that is gone, but we use these sites today for our core downtown and for parking. Okay, you have buildings that survive. So to the left of this shot, the retail buildings, those 3 brick wide, that's the architectural structure. There is no foundation. These are just bricks sitting on the dirt. They have survived for 145 or so years. And when we started, the recession gave us a lot of time to really look at ourselves and figure out what we were. We really studied these buildings to figure out what we were and how we could take what they had learned. No grandchild will tear these buildings down. So we tried to figure out what's the magic in these buildings and incorporate that into our new architecture so they would survive at least as long as these have. And we have icons. Every city has like a block or something that you're known for. In our case, this was Parsons. Parsons had a retail empire here. They serviced 12 or 13 stores out of the downtown. And so this is the legacy that we inherited. And again, that bank, which has survived, is there to the left. Okay, this is why the DDA gets involved and becomes a developer. So if you look at these statistics going back to the year 2000, these are construction starts inside the 10 square miles of the city of Duluth. And if you notice, about 2009, there was a very small construction start. If you look at 10, 11, 12, 13, nothing. So if you're growing so incredibly fast and the construction stops, something happened. It is either a famine, a pestilence, a war, some great catastrophic event occurred. This is unprecedented, not since the Depression. So what happened was the financial system of the United States and indeed the world collapsed. It didn't exist for a while. And so you could not borrow a penny to build anything. And that's where the Downtown Development Authority comes in. That's where the City Council comes in. Because if the natural forces aren't going to start doing something in community, you as the leadership structure, the city leaders, are going to have to do something to turn that around, because having no construction starts for 4 or 5 years is incredible in this area. Okay, so this is what downtown Duluth looked like in the year 2000. It was, remember 2000 was this incredible time where airplanes were going to fall out of the sky because the computers couldn't figure out how to go from 1999 to the year 2000. So this is, a modern time. We didn't have Town Green built. We didn't have the new City Hall built. We didn't have a fountain. We had a parking lot square in the center of our downtown. We had some really gritty industrial properties, city water tank, that's that round structure up the top. So there was a lot to do in the past 18 years to turn us into what we have become. And it all starts with leadership. Leadership is everything. This is the state of downtown in 2015. Remember, that is the bottom of the cycle of the recession, 2014-15. So we had industrial properties, we had vacant sites that had gone into bankruptcy, and what the city realized was that the recession made land affordable. We could actually buy property. So the city set out to buy everything that was either in foreclosure or in bankruptcy that was directly contiguous to the downtown core. We also put contracts and bought land that had uses that really weren't compatible with the direction that we were going. We owned this site because it was going to be a classic developer was going to come in and buy this site, put a $23 million development. That was 2008. 2009, that developer was gone, and we were stuck holding 30,000 square feet of very dilapidated retail space in our downtown. So we were the worst owners of property in the city. We would have condemned this, never let anybody run it. But it was the recession, so we were trying to figure out what to do. So we owned this. So let's talk about the Downtown Development Authority and the city. There is a relationship between the DDA and the city. And in some cases, the DDA is an independent body. The council appoints those members. There is specific legislation that authorizes the creation of a DDA. You don't have to have one. The city can create it or not. But if you do, it operates under this 36-62-4 in the Code of Georgia. And that's what gives you the authority to create a DDA. You can appoint those members. It's very specific how that membership structure is created for economic development members. Economic interest means you either own property or run a business. And then there are 3 at-large members. And in our case, we choose experts like architects or engineers to populate that DDA board. But it's 7 of those folks. And once you appoint them, they are there. You really can't remove a DDA member. So when I say choose members carefully, I mean it. Choose those people that want to reflect the vision of the community. And then DDA and the city are hand in glove. That is how they act. The city is the hand, the DDA is the glove, because it gets dirty out there to touch land and do things and develop it. But the city doesn't turn the DDA loose and say, hey, go make yourself happy. Do whatever you want to, because you're funding them, but they're an independent body. So membership is very careful. I'm spending a lot of time there because it's everything. Make sure those members reflect the vision of what you want your community to be. All right, the team. It takes the council. Again, leadership is everything. If you have great leaders, you can figure out how to work yourself out of any mess that you find yourself in. So the city council needs to have a clear vision about what it is they want to do, and then that DDA appointed in that vision, and that's a dash, not a slash. It means that those people are working together to incorporate that vision. So the staff is empowered by the city to carry out the vision of the city, and you need a city attorney. Attorneys, in the case of DDA, we love attorneys. You have to have them. And sometimes you have to have specialized real estate attorneys because you're doing real estate deals. You also need engineers, architects, they work for you. And then you carefully select your developer. You can fire a developer, you can fire an architect, you can fire an engineer. If they try to tell you what your vision is, You move into a different direction. You have the vision and you want these people to help you carry that out. All right, tools. Paperwork is a fact of life when it comes to the DDA. The tools you need to use are an intergovernmental agreement between the city and the DDA, a purchase and sell agreement between the DDA and the developer, a development agreement, surveys, and financial instruments. And we're going to go into some detail about what each of these things do. Land. All right. Development means taking land and changing the use. Now, land either has an owner and it's private or public. In the case of downtowns, we have private owners whose families have owned these properties. And I can tell you to remember this, no matter what the land has been doing and how long it's been occupied, you can change it as a DDA. So land use is either vacant or occupied, empty or thriving. The use can stay the same or it can change. If the city is buying land from the private sector, it's trying to do something to cause a change. The way that change occurs is through the Downtown Development Authority, if your goal is to turn it back over to the private sector. So DDA is the agent of change to make that happen. It is the legal way that you can do that in the state of Georgia. You cannot do it as a city. You cannot do private sector development as a city, but you can by empowering the DDA to be that private sector interface, and as long as that DDA knows what your vision is and you empower them to do it. Trust but verify. And the way you do that is through these agreements. So DDA is the redeveloper. We're going to specifically talk about Parsons Alley because that is the project that we really started working with, where the DDA was very intimate to everything that happened. And again, we were stuck with this thing because of the recession and we had to figure out what to do. And if that's the leading thing you have going for you in your town, you got to do something about it. So by the way, that was City Hall, the former church, 1947 to 1973. It was a Baptist church. City bought it in 1973, and then it was City Hall from 1973 to 2008. So it wasn't that long ago that this was the center of downtown. When we talk about redevelopment, in a downtown, everything has stuff on it. So, especially if you're an old downtown, there's stuff under the dirt, and you have no idea what it is until you start digging around. You find, although this site was on sewer, you find old septic tanks that are still active. And I won't go into details about that, but there are surprises in every project downtown. So, you're redeveloping existing sites. That's the nature of the game. All right, so Parsons Alley, what did we do? We bought the land intending to have a developer just do it, because that's really what cities mostly do, is they entitle and empower, but they don't get directly involved in developing a piece of property other than giving it a zoning and telling you what you can and can't do. In this case, it was going to be a scrape. The whole place was going to be wiped clean. And then the developer was going to build standard retail development that you'd find anywhere in America. The recession came along and it killed that. So, and no developer would touch it. Why would a developer not touch it? One, the financial system was dead. And two, it had stuff on it. And stuff is an unknown. If you don't know what's in those buildings, what's under that dirt, it's going to be tough to convince a developer to take the risk to go in there and deal with that. So we realized we had this thing and we had to do something with it. What we decided that we would do is we wanted to become a developer because no one else would do it. So we were a developer by necessity. And then the DDA became the bank to finance the deal. Because at the end of the day, we wanted to put all this back in the private sector. We want to get all our money back, and we want the town to thrive. Okay, so what we did, first thing is you got to know what you got. So we commissioned an ALTA survey. That survey is critical to any piece of property. It literally tells you everything that is on the site. Buildings, utilities, structures, things like that. You have to do it. You have to hire that surveyor, and you have to get out there and give you an ALTA, because you don't know what you have until you do. You really want this ALTA done before you buy the property, in case there are some pieces of property, suppose it was a battery acid factory, and you didn't want to own that thing because you had to dig up the dirt, for 300 feet. Some properties you just, our use, we just can't use it. So you want to know that through the ALTA survey. And then we created a site plan. Like, what are we going to do with this thing? So we looked at it as an extension of our town green. We wanted it to energize the town, and this really is the heart where the intersections come into downtown. So we got an idea about what we wanted. We hired professionals to help us with that. And remember, we got to knock all this stuff down and then create this site plan. All right, we then created a commercial subdivision, because what we wanted to do was empower a developer to build something. Now, we're going to loan them the money to do it. And the city decided that we would do all the common property. Because one of the things that developers have to do is put all this stuff underneath the ground that you can't see, but which costs them a lot of money. So that's hidden in the cost of the per square foot lease rate. It determines the quality of the building that you're building if the developer has to put all this money into infrastructure. The city said, hey, our grandkids tear down everything we do every 50 years if we don't do it right. So how do we do it right? We're going to give the developer a break, and we're going to do all that stuff that has to be done to create the downtown, to create that development site, and let the developer concentrate on just building the buildings. So we created this commercial subdivision. We subdivided it into lots, and we said, we're only going to sell you just the land that your building is going to go on to, but we are going to tell you what kind of building you're going to build. We're going to look at the materials, and we're going to, every detail matters to us. So here's the building footprints that we sold to the developer through the DDA that we carefully selected to carry out our vision. We commissioned a rendering of the space. Everybody's got a rendering. What's this thing going to look like? Because you have to convince leadership, people, everyone in the community, here's what we're going to do. If we're going to scrape this thing down, here's what we're going to put in its place. And we didn't really like the way this one looked. It still looked too traditional retail to us. So we commissioned another rendering. And this architect, Comberg Wall, really understood the vision of what we wanted to do. So this was what we sold to the community. This is what we're going to do. And the community is critical to allowing you to take their town and change it. Remember, DDA is the change agent. So we had this rendering. We said, this is the vision. If you trust us, this is what we're going to do. We're going to build this thing. So to finance this thing, again, we committed to do all the common property. We turned DDA into the bank. We did that through an economic development bond, and this was a taxable bond. So what we did was we went out and talked to a bank. Hey, bank, will you loan us some money? And they said, sure. They'll give it to us at this certain rate. The catch was we had 22 days to close the taxable bond. Now this is a big document. You got to get a judge to sign off on it. You have to kind of get your community to agree that, the basis behind that is your ability to tax. So we had to do all these things in 22 days, and we did it in 21. So we were able to borrow this money at a very good interest rate, and then we turned around, transferred it to the DDA with conditions to become the master lender for the project. Why did we do that? Because there wasn't a bank on earth that was going to loan money to do this project. One, it had all this stuff on it. Stuff is scary. It's unknown. It was in the height of the recession. So we're trying to figure out how to eliminate fear, and we did that by being the developer ourselves. The other thing we realized, if we're going to do restaurant space, that's very expensive space to develop in your town, you have to have a tenant reserve to loan money just for the tenant build out. Great to have the fantastic building, but if you can't build the space out, and if you're going after, really edgy restaurants, they don't have a whole lot of cash to pour into tenant improvements. They're doing their creation. So we set aside money to loan money to do the tenant build outs for the tenants that we wanted. We also asked the developer, hey, you got to have skin in this game. We're not taking all the risk ourselves, so we want you to put the first $1 million into the project. That's your equity injection, and that was the deal that we worked out. So that's the financing structure. We can do this because the state of Georgia authorizes us through 36-62-4. You have to remember, you're doing these things because you're allowed to do that, and you need to always familiarize yourself with the rules of what you're doing so you stay out of trouble. The IGA, so the Intergovernmental Agreement, this is how to make sure that the Downtown Development Authority carries out the vision of the community and the vision of the council who is funding this thing. So the Intergovernmental Agreement lists all the conditions. The city has gone out and purchased the land. They can do that. City can buy land. They buy the land. They want to transfer it to the Downtown Development Authority, but you do so with extensive conditions, and they are all spelled out. And I mean every single thing you want that DDA to do is in this Intergovernmental Agreement. And there are clawbacks. If you don't do it, you get the land back. Snatch it back. Then we have a purchase and sale agreement. So the intent is transfer it to Downtown Development Authority. They are then going to transfer this to a private developer. But the developer, we've got to make sure they do what they're supposed to, so we tie them with this agreement. So it reflects the Intergovernmental Agreement and then all the other things that we want to do in order for us to sell it to you. And in this document, we always have a clawback for non-performance, because we're not selling land for speculation. We want you to do something with it. So we give you 12 months to pull a land disturbance permit to do the project that you said you were going to do. If you don't do it, we keep that money in reserve, and then we pay your money back. We'll give that back to you, but you don't get to do the project. You don't get to hold the land so that you can sell it for profit as a speculative deal. We're wanting you to actually do something. Then we have the development agreement. So since the DDA was operating as a bank in this case, we have a very extensive development agreement. If we're going to give you money, you're going to do certain things with that money, and we're going to have performance milestones in that agreement. So again, the city attorney, real estate attorneys, very specialized stuff. You need to make sure you have a great relationship with those people, because they're going to keep you out of trouble. All right, well, one of the knocks about downtown is, since they're all owned by individuals, they operate when they want to. So there's no consistency. Like, one thing, when you go to the mall, is that at least the doors are open. There's some vendors in there, and they're going to be open at the time you go. In a downtown, it's always kind of hit and miss. I don't know if this guy's going to be open or not if I go there. And you see, I gone to lunch or had to go out the dog or whatever. So you're trying to, the city, since we're financing this thing, we said we expect anyone who operates on Parsons Alley, because we're putting in infrastructure, we're doing these great buildings, we want you to be open. So we have operating rules and regulations. We also want you to behave. So we're like the parents. We want these people to behave as neighbors and do the right things. So we have operating rules and regulations to keep them behaving nicely. The other thing is, land is going to be bought and sold. So if you're doing your job right, these things should increase in value, and there should be some opportunity to buy and sell properties. So we want the rules, everything that we've invested, to transfer with the property. So we hire a specialized real estate attorney to write a set of covenants. In this case, we became the declarant. The city of Duluth is the declarant on this development property. which means that we're the ones that set the tone and the pace and the rules, and are the ones that change those rules if they need to be changed. So this document is filed with the deed on the land, applies to every piece of property in the development for Parsons Alley. So we transfer these vested rights time after time, and we file them to make sure that they are tied to that land. So let's get to the fun part. What did we have out here? This is what Parsons Alley looked like at that time. It was a retail block. It was about 50 years old in some spots, and it was somewhat dilapidated. In fact, it was so dilapidated, council at the time said, hey, if this thing was going to be redeveloped and scraped, we're not putting any money into it because it's just going to be knocked down anyway. So we couldn't make any improvements to the property unless there was a life safety threat, which means, you know, roofs leaking, deterioration. It was just not a pretty sight in downtown. It's about 30,000 square feet of retail as well. All right, so this is what it looked like. This is off Main Street. It was kind of a colonial Williamsburg. The Parsons went down to Perry, Georgia, and they saw what Perry had done, and they loved it so much they came back up to Duluth and put that facade on their development. This was one of my favorite restaurants before it closed. It was a Cajun restaurant, and rumor is that there were crawfish crawling around in those ponds. They would escape and get out into the parking lot. This was the old City Hall, so we had to knock it all down. So there is a cost to knock down the stuff. We had to hire a very specialized contractor that, believe it or not, is a surgeon in that track hoe, because you have to knock this building down, but it's attached to the much beloved church, which was now City Hall. We needed you to preserve that building, or else the community would be very unhappy with us. So this guy had to knock that building down and keep the other one intact. More of those. So this was a shot taken right when we're doing the big demolition. If you drove up to downtown, it looks like the entire downtown is under siege and being demolished. So that's how big a footprint this was to the downtown. This was what remained. That square building was going to be the site of Dreamland Barbecue. We had convinced them to come in here and renovate this structure. We were going to preserve it. It was about 5,000 square feet. Land Barbecue, and that was the first investor into the project. And then we became a developer. One of the things about developing is you have to build it. There's a contractor. And for us, we wanted these people who were building on the site to understand how important it was that they were building something that we intended to last 50 to 100 years, or forever if it could. And so we wanted them to really understand the investment that we were making. We went out and talked to them really on a daily basis to keep the level of detail up and to keep those. We got to know their names. They were building something. We wanted them to be proud of what they were doing in downtown Duluth. This is the 1904 bank. Why is that structure still standing? It's standing because we didn't own it. We couldn't knock it down if we didn't own it, or it would have been knocked down. So the bank vault is in the interior. There was an add-on in the late 50s or so. That's the rear of it. So it was there, still operating as a business, all by itself, and about to have this massive construction project go on next to it. When I talked about the fact that the city put in a lot of the infrastructure, so the city owns land in Parsons Alley. The DDA operates the rest of it, selling that land to the developer. Well, that allowed the developer and the architect to create shapes and spaces and things like that that were above the normal. So we had details on bricks, windows, especially window treatments. And so we had a specific plan with the developer about going after tenants that were wily, crafty veterans in the restaurant industry, 20 years or more of experience, with people who understood that operating a restaurant is some of the hardest work in the world. And it has some of the highest failure rates in the world. And so if you're going to anchor your town with an entertainment district, a restaurant district, you really need people who know what they're doing. So we want people who've dreamed 20 years ago about being a restaurateur, not the ones who woke up this morning and had a dream that they want to open a restaurant. So those are kind of the players that we have attracted to the space. And the thing about a suburb is that they have the opportunity to actually own these properties. So if they want to buy those buildings, they can. Hard to do that in downtown Atlanta. All right, so I'm going to go through some before and after. So this is the power of the Downtown Development Authority to take land and change its current use. So one of the discouraging things about development is its permanence, that it feels like you can never change it because it's always been there. So these buildings have been around for about 50 years, and you're looking at it, what do we do? You have to have vision to see what you can become. So this was that vision. So the same footprint for that warehouse is now the plaza. The back half of that warehouse is the newly constructed Dreamland Barbecue. And what that did was create a space for people to gather. We shut down West Lawrenceville Street there. And again, I'm talking about place names here that matter to Duluth, but this is the same in your community. You have these special places that you can create in your downtown anywhere in Georgia. And you have a population base that will come to those places if you create spaces that are happy and that they enjoy. And that's the whole point of doing that, is to create a space that people can gather. Why is that important? Because the bigger picture is economic development. And economic development occurs in places. So creating these happy spaces means that people who own industry and businesses want to live in your community, and they'll bring those to the local economy. Some more shots of the space. You know, it's really a nice, inviting, happy space. Again, the developers only own the footprints for the buildings. The city owns everything else. And that allows us to control behavior. This is a shot of the finished product. Really, we think we did a good job for the community. And we hope those grandkids do not tear this down after 50 years, because we have about 13 million bucks in this thing. All right, so this was the old City Hall. It became a consignment shop. And now it's the home of Maple Street Biscuit. And that is an awesome spot. First time I walked into this development after they had converted this building to Maple Street, for the first time in my life, I could not speak, and I had tears running down to my eyes, because they did a fantastic job. And I'd been in that building for years, knowing that it was empty and old, and it was in danger of being destroyed, but it survived, and now it serves as Maple Street Biscuit every single day. All right, so this is what it was before, kind of a stark looking structure. And this is what it is now. So we created retail spaces, allowed the architect to really reach out and create forms and shapes as if it had always been there. Before, after. So we kept the scale. And again, because you're financing this thing and you're the developer, you, as the city and Downtown Development Authority, get to decide these details. Most of the time we're dealing with developers who come in and they just tell us what they're going to do, and then we enforce them through codes and ordinances and zoning, but we don't really tell them what kind of styles we want. In this case, you get to do that. And by the way, those rents, those are some of the lowest square foot rents in the city. They're now some of the highest per square foot rents. So there is an actual tax value return, and that was a zero performing tax base. And now it's in the private sector paying dividends and paying us the money back that the DDA loaned to them. All right, so that was the bank before and the bank after. So this site became the Chocolatery. They were at a mall prior to this. In the first month they were here, they made more money than most of the months they were in that mall. So downtowns are really back in a big way, and the malls are suffering. So it's kind of interesting that this full turn has occurred. Downtowns are very thriving, and you can do that through the Downtown Development Authority. All right, so this was another piece of property that the city owned. We affectionately called it the hole because for 5 years it was a hole in the middle of downtown. A very challenging site because you're building in between two buildings. This is what is there today. So the city transferred that land to the Downtown Development Authority. Downtown Development Authority sold it to a developer with conditions, and this is the building that they constructed in there. And I dare say that one looks like it has been there all of the history of Duluth, and we hope, again, that it survives the 50-year test. One of the things that we're trying to do through the Downtown Development Authority is attract residential development. We had a bunch of industrial land in downtown, so this was industrial land, and it is now the site of 36 townhomes. During the recession, the city bought the land because it was affordable. And then this is one of the few properties where we bought and sold it for higher than we paid for it. And now it has just been complete. The average price of those townhomes, $430,000. So we bought the land for $500,000. We sold it for $8,000. And now there are homes on there, 36 of them, whose average cost was $430,000. That is a big flip. And this is what they look like. And those are right behind City Hall. This was an asphalt plant. This was a materials storage yard for a grading contractor. And it was the home of a gypsum contractor, gypsum board, that brought in loads of gypsum or sheetrock from the rail. So about 18 acres. And there was a lot of gritty stuff there. So we had to do something about this, and we turned it into residential. So the Downtown Development Authority negotiated or bought this land or put it under contract. The city bought it and then transferred it to the DDA. We also built a regional stormwater facility to handle all of the downtown on that side. So this is what will be built there. 114 fee simple homes. Again, the Downtown Development Authority changing the use of land from what performed in its time, industrial properties for the city, but now becoming homes for people who want to be walkable to the downtown. We built this restaurant district, and so now people want to live next to it. So we're doing townhomes, we're doing single family, rear and front loaded homes, and then we built stormwater retention. Another deal that we're doing, remember we're going back to the master plan, just moving that forward when we can, is cities buy up land and turn them into parking lots, because parking lots are going to grow up and become something someday. So we bought this particular piece of property, took the buildings that were down on it, and then created parking out of it, and now it's going to be a municipal parking structure plus a hotel sitting on top. Again, land that was zero tax base going back into the private sector. And this one needed a lot of attorneys, a lot of architects, and a lot of engineers to make it happen. That's what it will look like. One of the power of owning property is that you can kind of tell the developer what you'd like to see on it. So if you want to move your hotel here, great, but it needs to look like that. So that is a Marriott Courtyard custom designed for downtown Duluth to fit in with its architecture. And it's sitting on top of a municipal parking deck. This is not a DDA project, but because those other projects occurred, you're looking at the core, how do you get that benefit to aggregate? It's the side benefits is there are other properties near your downtown. This is inside the Downtown Development Authority district, so it is a DDA boundary. But the whole goal of investing, the DDA really doesn't want to be in the development business. You're just doing it because you're jump-starting the economy and getting it moving forward. So what you're really trying to do is to encourage the private sector to come in and take down these structures and put developments in that you are crafting. So we have this handy-dandy little tool called a plan unit development that's in the zoning ordinance. We literally create a zoning district and then tell you what to do. This site was a 60-year-old shopping center, and it had seen its best day. So when Mayor Nancy Harris ran for office, one of the things that people said is, what are you going to do about Proctor Square? Her answer was, I don't know, we don't own it. And we did not own it. So, but we did have the power of entitlement. And that is a huge power that councils wield through the zoning ordinance. So, this was again an empty shopping center. That was the front door of Duluth. That's what you saw when you came down the road on 120. All of your communities have something like this. So 1960 shop, it was great in its day, but it has served its time. And so cities and DDAs are change agents to change the use of land. And so we did this through zoning based on the fact that these guys wanted to be close to the development that DDA and the city had created at Parsons Alley. They wanted to be able to walk to it. So any land within 5 or 10 minute walk of your downtown is the target. So this is what is there now. This was a 371 unit mixed use. So there's 11 retail spaces, 10,000 square feet of traditional retail and some live work spaces. And then there are 27 conditions on this property because it is very scary for a city council to approve a mega project like this in your core downtown. So we put 27 conditions in the zoning, they agreed with those, and this is what they built. So we now have all these people living 5-minute walk from downtown, and that will spread up and down Beaufort Highway, recreating the town, putting value. If we talk about investment, fear of investment, that was a $3 million project on the tax rolls. They built it for $64 million. Prior to lease up, because they just completed this thing, prior to lease up, they sold it in December for $82 million. That's a $20 million profit, so to speak. That will get your attention if you're an investor and a developer anywhere. So we like to say that because we were investing in Parsons Alley through the Downtown Development Authority and becoming a developer, that we attracted developers to take down the properties, which there's no way we would have been able to do a project like that. We needed the ability and the financing resources of a company like the residential group to come in and believe in what we were doing and put this urban style residential unit with a wrap deck in downtown Duluth. So that's sort of the completed picture. Downtown's about 50% built out as far as the land that the DDA has. So the land at the upper right, that's where the DDA is doing the rest of these deals. So you got Parsons Alley in the foreground, residential group, district at Duluth across the street. And I'm going to end up by saying this, that legacy is determined by your grandkids. So that little girl is going to decide if anything we did in the time that we have amounted to anything that's worthy of lasting generation after generation. And after all, if you're a city, what you really want to be is to continue in being, and you want things that the youngest child born today can touch, and the oldest person alive in that community touches the same wall. That's continuation. Legacy is everything. Do the best that you can with what you have in your community in the time that you have. And the key ingredients for that are leadership, willingness to think and dream big, and then using the tools that the state of Georgia has given you through the Downtown Development Authority authorizing legislation, and then getting some good people that have your vision. And by the way, if they don't have the vision, fire them and get someone else that does. It's your city. Develop it the way you want. Thank you.